Welcome to an unbelievably cold Oslo. Just to prove I'm really here. I know what some of you are like. Hi everybody, today I'm in Norway, in Oslo. I'm here for a couple of days, travelling around, doing a few talks and promoting the new book, The Amble of the Psyche. And the cover, let me tell you the cover is from a painting I did. It represents Socrates. It represents the poison chalice that Socrates was given when the basically the fascists and the psychopaths in Athenian society decided that he had to be taken out. And this serpent-like thing represents the fact that as soon as they killed him, or as soon as he committed suicide, according to their laws, his legendary status was immediately ensured. In fact, so many people were so disgusted at Socrates. Okay, he was a scruffy little man. He was awkward, but he was generally very well liked. Most people thought he was, he never said anything bad about anyone, and he was generally well-meaning. And he was, as soon as he died, there was a tremendous hatred and resentment of the people who sentenced him to death, and they were vilified and shunned and ignored, and until some of them had to even commit suicide because they would not give them any business or anything, because they just felt, people believed it was just such an injustice that a good guy like Socrates was taken out by these wankers. Now, it's a common thing through history. You find that people who, in the moment, nobody really cares about them, or they're vilified, and suddenly it takes a while for the rest of the world to catch up. And it's sometimes happened with groups as well. And you wonder why this is. It's a very interesting thing. Okay, human beings are by nature sort of pack animals, and they do go with the status quo, and this is why human beings they're far more prone to mass hysteria and witch hunts than they are to individual ideas. It's just how people are. It's just where they are. And it's almost like, what causes someone to tap into something before it becomes, a meme, before it becomes, the word, accepted truth. And it's almost like that people have an insight right before these things break, and it's almost like it's like the animals who know a tsunami is coming, and they run off the beach and into the mountains. It's the same kind of thing with people who see sort of future ideas before they happen. There's something about some people can just tap onto the zeitgeist before these cultures or these realities flow towards everyone else. They're like almost like the lookouts on an old ship, spotting icebergs or spotting, other ships ahead. And then it's the same as everywhere else. There's when people first hear the term psychopath, it has that effect on them. It's very intense. They know it's a strong term, so they think, like in any other country, serial killer. But they're also intrigued as well. Some people are. Some people will be nervous about it, or they'll have a denial about it because they may be afraid they're going to hear something they don't want to hear. So it's very important for my own approach, being here and being everywhere else, to not cause a sort of a sense of panic that this is a very rare thing, but one psychopath can damage many lives. But it's a rare thing, but it's a good knowledge to have. And I think people are expecting it to be a kind of a fearful thing, but I don't sell it that way. My attitude is, look, this is a problem that could enter into your life. It could affect your family. It could affect your community, and very likely will affect your workplace at some point, especially if you're a professional. And it's best to know, and definitely will affect your life if you have a government or big corporations. And it's best to know these things in a preventative sense before it happens to you. So what's been good about Norway has been a lot of young people have come to the talks here, where I'd say the demographic is spread between people who are
late teens, early 20s, all the way up to, you know, retirement, senior citizens. That's a big spread compared to what you get in Britain and Ireland and other places I've been to. And that's very good that the younger people seem to be more open to this stuff, and they're less sort of fearful of it. Because I think that's the trepidation there. There's people think, oh, this is dark stuff. I'm going to hear dark stuff here. But my attitude is, well, no, it doesn't have to be. It doesn't have to be. And the way I present this message is in a sort of an understandable, clear manner. To me, it's like dealing with a psychopath is the same thing as dealing with an industrial hazard. I mean that, like, literally, you have dangerous chemicals if you work in an industrial setting, biohazards, if you work in waste. Well, there are people who are the same way. I know that sounds kind of harsh, but it's true. There are people who are like that, okay? And they have to be treated in the same way. You must have the same precautions, you must have the same safety measures that you must apply to them to protect yourself from what I consider a kind of a toxin, a pathological toxin. And it makes good common sense to know how to deal with these people in that manner, without being emotional, without being over judgmental, without being paranoid. Just saying, in my life there's a possibility I could meet someone who's like this. So the best thing is to know how to deal with them. But then that's the second part of that, is people they'll be aware that they've had this experience in their lives. Yeah, well, they've no choice. You know, it's this problem exists. This issue is real, and they'll have to. Like, ignoring cancer doesn't make cancer not exist. You know, I don't buy into the whole thing if I don't look at it, and I don't think the New Age thing. If I don't acknowledge evil, evil won't come to me. Well, I'm sorry, it's the other way around. It's the other way around, because opposites do attract. That's the whole thing. The negative pole of a magnet is attracted to the positive. And so you think if that's like an empathic person, and that's a psychopath, right? The empathic person is the positive pole of a magnet, and the negative is the psychopath. There's an immovable force will always attract them. However, when the empathic person has knowledge of how the psychopath works, okay, then the poles are different. It's switched, so they can't be affected, okay? And we live in an age where people are very vulnerable, probably more vulnerable than ever, because of things like the internet and social media. It makes the psychopath operate on a very vast scale, where of a multi-dimensional and multi-personality scale, where if they lived in a town or a city before, there's always a danger of encountering the different manipulations crossing over, but the internet allows them to separate them all, to put very clear demarcations between their pathology. So more people are going to encounter them simply because of technology, because this will change things. Another thing too as well, it's unavoidable, is that we have to come to terms with the fact that governments and major corporations they're psychopathic in nature now. They just are. And people are sick and tired of believing that this is just the way the world is, that this is just the way politicians are, this is just the way, politicians, that's just how they are, or this is just how corporations are and how it'll always have been and always will be. But all you have to do is look at the financial and economic chaos around the world to know that they don't work. They don't work because they're pathological. They don't work because the underlying thrust and drive of a major corporation is precisely the same as that as a psychopath. Now, that doesn't mean that everyone who works for a big corporation is a psychopath. They're not. But they're trapped within a kind of a sort of a pathological flow of, like a river, and they're part of it. And that's not working. It's not. The world is in financial chaos. No, it's just a mess. If the economic system worked, we wouldn't need IMF bailing out countries. This is because of the psychopathic nature. People will have to come to terms with that there's a different agenda running business and politics that's completely different than how we interact with each other in our everyday lives. Therefore, the main thing to understand that is to look for people in your life who may be psychopathic, but not be paranoid about it. And if you can identify them, especially ones from past relationships that left you in a very bad way, or even members of your own family who you just know there's something wrong there, or most commonly a workplace bully, when you understand what you're dealing with, right, the next thing that happens after that is you scale up the experience to other strata in society, and you realize, my God, this is a seam, a vine, a thread, almost like a malignant conduit that runs from the bottom of society to the top. And if we can cut off at one part that, we can cut off a complete supply chain. So for instance, if I could reach, and I'm not just new, there's lots of people doing it now, but if we could reach enough people in their personal lives to develop this kind of psychic firewall, this consciousness firewall against these pathological predators, we put them out of business at the bottom. There's no need for anything else. No need for witch hunts, no need for identification. Knowledge is power, education. We put them out of business at the bottom. Then we can take care of the problem in business, in politics, so people have no choice. So I do believe we can come to terms with this. In fact, I actually believe that there's so many people now talking about this subject compared to a few years ago, that something is going on. There's something that we're being given some kind of opportunity here, an evolutionary, whatever, but it's absolute. I could see it. No one was talking about this stuff 5 years ago. It seems to be a lot of people are talking about it now. There's lots of newspaper articles, there's lots of things about it. It's definitely a growing knowledge. So that's positive. We're winning.
There is a lot of rebellious youngsters. Do you think they see this? They don't know what it is, but they don't agree, they don't accept?
Oh, I think that's what youth rebellion is and always has been. I think it is. No, I mean, I grew up in the punk rock phase, and we were very cynical of government and stuff, and I think part of my journey was being that cynical when I was younger. When I first went to New York, I was hanging out with kids who were like tagging graffiti, like down, like these were kids from like the South Bronx and stuff, and they were very well aware. You see, they don't have the language to name it, but you know something is wrong. Okay, if you don't know what a slap in the face is called, and you get a slap in the face, you still get a slap in the face. Okay, the same thing with the psychopath. But once we can name these things, once we can, there's like that whole Native American thing. It's also very common in indigenous cultures that when you name a thing, you then have it under control. So now we have the terminology, the psychopath. We can name it, and now people have a reference. And I definitely believe the next generation, forget about us. We're like the frontline cannon fodder, right? We're just running in there, kicking down the door, saying, "Look, here's what's going on." The ones that follow us will be able to pick up the baton and then bring it home to conclusion. And I definitely will. I can see a shift. I can see we hopefully our generation will be the last generation of prey. That's the way I see it. So yeah, I think so. Yeah. Definitely, the youth. God, I think the more young people that are cynical, the more young people that are rebellious. Good luck to them. We need them. We need young people to be. It's like Gore Vidal said, a patriot is somebody who's very rude to his government, and that's what we need. People who are very rude to their governments. Well, I've already been here twice now, and I've spoken about the relationship, the personal, the interactives. There's the one you meet in your life, and it went down very well. I've had nothing but positive reviews. People have come back, and that's great. And so there's an excitement there. Those people are saying, so my attitude is that, okay, again, we've dealt with the one in your life and the one in the street. Now let's look at it through on the bigger picture, because it's all the same thing. So I'm now bringing this work. This is to go out with my new book, The Anvil of the Psyche, where I'm particularly interested in culture and the effect of culture upon human development. Culture is always and has been for a long time, in terms of popular culture, has always been a top-down development. Like, it hasn't risen from the folk masses and come up and become culture. Yes, that does happen, but that doesn't happen anymore. Now it comes from the top down. It's an engineered process, and has been for a very long time, because this culture is created to normalize psychopathology. You understand? Look, we have all these vampire shows on TV. That's all they're about. They're about nothing else. This is a psychopath, that's how they behave, and that's normal. Things like gangster rap, Okay, back in the early 80s, you had the hip hop culture that came up out of the South Bronx and places like that in New York, right? These were young, disenfranchised urban youth who were looking to have a creative expression rather than joining gangs and things like that. And they did it with things like graffiti, breakdancing, hip hop, rap. And it was incredibly powerful, and it took over in a very short time, not just in the USA but all over the world. There was an instant spark of recognition that here's something important and vital from the underground. So what happens? It suddenly becomes MTV suddenly become, black, which is another way of saying we own this, okay? And they take over the rap culture and they turn it into something called hip hop. And hip hop, gangster rap. And this gangster rap is completely different in terms of its lyrical nature than the previous rap. It promotes violence, it promotes, a horror, unbelievable things when you listen to some of the lyrics, killing and stuff like that. And it glamorizes the negative traits that the original hip-hop people were trying to get away from. So they brought it right back in, and suddenly you have this sort of like incredibly violent. Now you could say, okay, it's just an expression of energies and stuff like that, and that's true as well, but it wasn't being run by kids in the street. It was being, and then you could say also that, oh well, gangs are a fact of life in the inner city, but they weren't. The actual scene itself was being run by rich white guys in corporations who were twisting it around for an agenda. And the agenda was and I know this sounds like conspiracy theory, but at the time it was happening, they were building large numbers of prisons in the United States. They were building prisons everywhere. And these prisons are not just incarceration centers, they're factories. They get contracts to produce products. And they needed to fill them. At the same time this was happening, they created a thing called the 3 strikes law, where you have 3 strikes and you're out. You could steal 3 slices of pizza, be convicted 3 times, and you'll get life imprisonment. It doesn't matter the counts. So it's very easy. Then what they do then is they would fill the prisons with people on incredibly long sentences for minor crimes, and this was a free workforce. And only a psychopath could think like that. Because a psychopath, he plans ahead, she plans ahead. She's thinking years down the road. Because there's no other feelings in there, there's no other empathy for humans, they can spend years being devious into the future. Because they're devoted and driven for this. And that's a classic example. And what I call the psychopathic control grid did, just say using hip-hop as an example, right, is exactly the same thing as when a psychopath sees a person on their neighborhood, say an elderly person, say the husband dies, and decides, I will become friends with that person in order to inherit their money and their home in a few years. It's exactly the same.